breaks the bow and shatters the spear. Gentleness reigns when God is near. God is our refuge and strength, the one on whom we depend. Though the mountains may fall to the heart of the sea, I shall not fear, for God is with me. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Lord Almighty, who is with us? The God of Jacob is our fortress. God is our refuge and strength, the one on whom we depend. Though the mountains may fall to the heart of the sea, I shall not fear, for God is with me. God is our refuge and strength, the one on whom we depend. Though the mountains may fall to the heart of the sea, I shall not fear, for God is with me. Shadows all around me, stardust is my night. And now that love has found me, I've been living in the light. Well, day and night shine a bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. A day and night shine a bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. Waiting for the sunrise to come and fill the sky. I can see the sunshine when I look into your eyes. Well, day and night shine a bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. A day and night shine a bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. We are walking in 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 the light of God. Your day and night shining bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. A day and night shining bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. Oh, day and night shining bright, bright light. Bright be the light of God. A day and night shining bright, bright light. We are walking. Be the light. Walking in the light.
Many are the wonders of God, many doors open wide, many that are still untraveled.
Many are gifts that we share, many burdens we bear, many mysteries still unraveled. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Some will be the teachers of life, some the preachers of love, some the fathers and some the mothers. Some will be the ones who will care, some will listen and share, serving God as they serve each other. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love.
Living as the body of Christ, and the heart of the earth, and the hands that will break new ground.
Celebrate the gifts from within. Now it's time to begin. God's people turn this world around now. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Oh, many gifts, one spirit of love, one spirit of love. Yeah, yeah. Morning breaking, night is fading out. Day and evening find their common ground. You see it your way and I see it mine. This is where we see things eye to eye. In the moment where the light meets night, we'll be standing side by side. It doesn't matter if you're left or right, if we're both on the side of love, on the side of love, on the side of love. In the places you and I collide, fear divides us, locks us up inside. Knock down, drag out, soul search, fight. My heart wants to be so open wide. In the moment where the light meets night, we'll be standing side by side. we'll be standing side by side. It doesn't matter if you're left or right, if we're both on the side of love. In the magic of the chance we share, we can take this feeling anywhere. Make it happen if we only dare to stand on the side of love, on the side of love, on the side of love.
All right, welcome everybody to the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign workshop for the Regional Assembly of the Christian Church in Kentucky. We are happy to be with you all tonight virtually and ask your patience as we are navigating this new technological world with you. So we have recorded this in advance, but we will be around at the end of the presentation to answer any questions you might have about what you've learned tonight. So we thought we would just start with some introductions of who we are and why we're here with you today. So Pastor Don, why don't you get us started?
Once again, we welcome you to this workshop. My name is K.Gilett, and I am the senior pastor at the East 2nd Street Christian Church in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm also the executive director of the Kentucky Council of Churches, and I share the role of tri-chair of the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign, along with Megan and several others. I believe that we are at a time, or have been at a time in our country, that we need persons to begin being the voice for the voiceless. As you may or may not know, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, is the nexus of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King produced or was leading, organizing, looking at bringing together all the people. And so 40, 50 years since that time, we're probably worse off than we were during the 60s. And so for me, I come to this from a sense of compassion, a sense of love, and a sense of God's call to do justice. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm glad to be part of this team leading this workshop.
And I am Reverend Megan Huston, and I'm Senior Minister of First Christian Church, Bowling Green, Kentucky. And I'm also one of the tri-chairs for the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign with Pastor Don and 2 other amazing activists doing this work in Kentucky. To tell you why I do this work, I have to talk about my twin daughters. When I was first introduced to the Poor People's Campaign, my daughters were less than a year old. They're 4 now. But I was coming back to church after a maternity leave and really asking questions about what does it mean to be the church? And I bring that up because I think we're all asking that question right now in the midst of pandemic, in the midst of sort of a racial reckoning where we're finally seeing the disparities in our country. We're asking these questions in the middle of such a divisive political climate. And I think the Poor People's Campaign has very much shaped my understanding of what it means to be the church. I think there are a lot of things that the church has been silent about, that the church has been afraid to speak out on, that Bishop Reverend William Barber has really given us a way to speak out and given us the tools to pray, not only with our words, not only with our hearts, but with our feet. And so I'm here because my life has been transformed by this movement, by the people who we have met, but also my church has been transformed by this movement. And so I imagine if you're here, you are a faithful disciple, whether you're a pastor or a lay person. And I think I just want you to know that Pastor Don and we are in the trenches with you. We are both local pastors, and we know what it means to love the church and to do this work of justice, which can be so challenging in normal times, but especially in these times. We have the link up here to poorpeoplescampaign.org. We'll share this again at the end of the presentation, but we wanted to be sure that you have that website, because if you hear something today and you're not already signed up for Kentucky Poor People's Campaign, you can go to that link and enter your information and be connected to all the emails about direct actions we're doing, about webinars we're doing, about different things that the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign is involved with. Before we get to the fact sheet, we wanted to ask, well, actually, we want to show you a video as a part of our introduction. And so if you'll bear with me, I've got to change the screen that I'm sharing. But this is just a basic introduction to Poor People's Campaign that we're going to share with you.
Our backs are against the wall, and we got no choice but to push.
Before you come down here and cast stones in a glass home, walk a mile in their shoes for me.
1 out of 16 people in Aberdeen are homeless. A lot of people are young. That's something that's...
In this camp?
Yeah.
So they're millennials?
Yeah, between 18 and 35.
Between 18
is probably the largest demographic here.
No health care. Over there's a memorial cross when my younger brother died this winter.
Yeah.
He had a heart attack or a stroke due to freaking pneumonia that he couldn't get to the doctor in time. But we kept trying to get him up there, and every time we sent him up there, they sent him back with no antibiotics. Gave him a couple ibuprofen and said, "Oh, you get better." That's how they treat people down here. And he ended up having pneumonia so bad that he coughed so hard it caused a stroke in his head. Another thing to open your eyes to this area down here: when men get out of the service, we're overqualified for jobs. What is overqualified?
What is it?
That's their polite way of saying they don't want to take the risk to employing you. We were in charge of $1 million machinery, guns, everything. but we can't flip a burger, wash a car, or
And you want to.
just to work.
Just to work.
Get back into society, man.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
My name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on power. And I have to travel back and forth to Birmingham to take my daughter with the CPAP machine. Don't have a car and don't have no way to take her.
There's a new chemical company that's producing another carcinogen. And when you think of that, what effect does that have on us as people, especially our children? But in our community, it's amazing the people who just started dying of cancer. That became the big fear. And when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, I was amazed at the black women that would ring our doorbell and walk in the door and pull a wig off to show my wife that I have it too. That red stuff you see there, yeah, that's the chemical, which is primarily mercury. And they dump tons of it in the river. The school over there, directly across the school ground. And we tried to get the government to test that, the earth, the soil in the playground, and they refused to do it.
Now, I'm also a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide at a far greater rate than the national average. Why? Because they're stressed out. They're stressed out. They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs because they can't pay for all the equipment that it takes to run a farm. And they're in the most dangerous line of work there is, yet many can't afford to buy health insurance. We have no hospital. We are in a food desert. We have one grocery store for the whole county. Our neighbor, my husband's uncle, still drinks pond water self-treated with chlorine. He had to have a kidney removed at age 64. And the year before that, his wife died of some unknown cancer.
We started in a Lamb Homo Indian colony, which when you enter the reservation, before you enter the reservation, it says hazardous area. Enter at your own risk by the county lake of Clear Lake, California. They've been mining mercury since 1957 and have left it open with heavy metal leaking into the water and the land. They stopped fishing in the 1970s and have a high rate of cancer in the community. I worry because I have family, not only just my family there, but the indigenous people in the surrounding communities are already being affected. We talk about healthcare. We talk about worrying about the environment, but yet when they're allowing open pit mines and letting it leak into the land, into the water, the high rate of cancer and the high bills of health is going to continue to raise because of corporations and greed and politicians that don't want to listen.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
I'm here today to share my daughter Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast. She wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
This is not right.
Follow that breaking news in Albany, where a large group of protesters have moved into the street.
Washington Avenue between City Hall and Lark Street closed down.
Protesters with the Poor People's Campaign of Indiana.
2 o'clock on the East Coast, 2 o'clock in the middle, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. A wave, and the historians tell us it's never happened before.
All right. So that gives us a little bit of introduction into the campaign and some of the work that we've done and some of the impacted people. We want to talk a little bit more about Kentucky specifically. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Maybe I can find it. So before we talk about Kentucky, we wanted to give you a moment to think about, we talked to you about why we're here, and we heard a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign and who we are, but we'd really like to know why you're here. Unfortunately, we're not in person. We would ask this question and take answers if we were in the same room, but also because this is pre-recorded, it's a little less interactive, but we do want to take a moment for you to consider why you're here. I attended a conference one time where I heard it said that thriving churches have to be able to answer the question, what is breaking God's heart in our community? And so as a way of, thinking about why you're here and what compelled you to come to this particular workshop, we want to just take a moment for you to think about, maybe jot down some notes of what's breaking God's heart in your community. And then we're going to share a little bit about some facts and faces of what we think is breaking God's heart in our state. But we're just going to be quiet and give you a minute to think about that. So hopefully you've had a little time to think about that, and maybe at the end of our time together, we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit more. So we want to talk a little bit.
Megan, I think that as persons have thought about them, the things that are breaking their hearts, I think they would fall once again in line with one of the 5 basic principles of the Poor People's Campaign. Systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted Christian narrative, that national narrative that we're going through. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go on. But I would like for the persons to think about how their thoughts of what is breaking the heart of God, how it fits probably in one of those 4 or 5 categories, just to see the need for this movement, not an organization, but for this movement of the Poor People's Campaign.
Yes, for sure. So a few facts about Kentucky, and to tell you those, there's a lot of facts, and we're going to show you a resource where you can find all this information at poorpeoplescampaign.org. But in order to not completely overload you with data points, we pulled out just a few. And the way we operate as Kentucky Poor People's Campaign is that typically this presentation is a little bit different because Pastor Don and I are disciples talking to other disciples. But typically, if any of you have been to a Poor People's Campaign event, we don't talk about issues. We hear people's stories within those issues. And so rather than just saying, here are the facts about poverty in Kentucky, normally you would hear somebody who's experiencing poverty tell their own story. And so we wanted to simulate that experience as much as possible by sharing just a few stories and some facts around those in Kentucky. So, and
once again, these facts are what we would think and look at and believe are breaking God's heart in Kentucky.
Yes, for sure. So do you want to talk about Amanda, or do you want me to, Pastor Don?
You go ahead with Amanda.
Okay. So this is Amanda, and she spoke at our very first direct action when we launched the 40 days of nonviolent civil disobedience. Reverend Barber referenced that at the end of that video we just watched when he was talking about 2 o'clock. It happened, and in the different time zones at 2 o'clock across the country, there had historically never been such a coordinated effort of nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience until that 40 days of direct action, which happened in 2018 when we relaunched the Poor People's Campaign. As Pastor Don reminded us, this was picking up the mantle from the 1968 Poor People's Campaign and continuing the movement. And so Amanda was one of our speakers at our very first direct action that we had. This is out in Frankfurt. And Amanda is an activist who is pretty incredible and talked about how a lack of healthcare was impacting her community. According to the Kentucky fact sheet, there are 240,000 people in Kentucky who are uninsured as of 2018.
Another person, Brother Sheldon, who has been with us through several of our events, one who has, as you see here, who has been part of a lot of the activities of the Poor People's Campaign. Sheldon tells a story, or one of his quotes that I like is that really touches my heart, is that he mentions that at 3 years old, that he went into foster care, and that after his 17th birthday, he found himself in prison. And he talks about how he was in prison and how when he got out of prison, they dropped him at a bus stop, gave him a couple of dollars, and that was it. There were no social services. There was nothing to really help him to reintegrate back into society. And we see that there are lack of social programs. And what we find is that the money is being spent more and more on prison beds. And so Sheldon tells this story from the perspective of poverty and from a place of being an African-American male caught up in the legal or the legal system. I won't call it a justice system because sometimes there is no justice. From the legal standpoint, the legal system, and how he had to overcome a lot of things, but yet he's still fighting for those things. Can you go to the next slide? One of the facts that you will find in the fact sheet that 37% of people in Kentucky are poor or low income. That means that there's more than or close to 1.6 million Commonwealth citizens that are deemed poor, and that's by the government standards of the poverty line, but we know that number is far greater than that. For such a wealthy nation to have such a high rate of poverty, there is a problem. Next slide.
Yes, and I would point out too that, these are statistics pre-COVID. we know that now it has only gotten worse, especially for the lowest wage workers in our state, especially for hourly workers in our state. These are statistics that we started with as our movement was being relaunched in 2018. But I would go as far as to say that these are certainly worse and greatened by the pandemic.
This poverty level that we speak of pre-COVID included 50% of children, 44% of women, 56% of Black persons, 67% of Latinx people, and 40% of white people. These numbers are astounding for us to be the richest nation or the richest country in the world and to have such poverty levels. And so this really gets to our heart when we talk about the systems of poverty.
Yes. And before we go to the next slide, the cute babies in this picture are mine. So I want to make sure you guys all know that they did their part in the 40 days of nonviolent direct action. They're singing there. Remember when we can all sing together? The next person, do you want me to take this one, Pastor Dawn? This is Christina, and she is a school teacher in the public school system. She talked about the devaluing of teachers and public education and just the struggle of many families in underpaid jobs to make it. When we look at our Kentucky fact sheet, Kentucky ranks 29th of all states in the quality of child education. And we think, in the 40 days that we were doing direct actions, that was also the summer that teachers were up there fighting for their pensions, including Christina. And we think the way we value our public educators directly impacts the quality of our children's education, and that there is no reason in the United States to not have quality public education for our kids. So next, we want to talk a little bit about our campaign's fundamental principles. These are so important, and if you've been a part of any of our work, you've probably heard these. When we would do our direct actions together, we would read these aloud before every single direct action. These guide us, these root us. These are really our promises, our covenant to each other about the work that we do, why we do it, but also how we do it.
One, our first principle, we are rooted in a moral analysis based on our deepest religious and constitutional values that demand justice for all. Moral revival is necessary to save the heart and soul of our democracy.
Before we go to number 2, I'm going to go off script here and tell a story. This picture here is from the Indiana Poor People's Campaign. And it's really special to me because back in 2018, the same night that we spent the night in our state capitol, protesters in Indiana with their Poor People's Campaign spent something like 24 hours chained to the governor's gate in nonviolent direct action. And what was really incredible was as we were overnight in the Capitol trying to sleep on concrete, trying to find quarters for the vending machine so we would have something to sustain us through the night, wondering at what point we might be arrested or not. There was such an incredible sense of solidarity with the Indiana Poor People's Campaign. And I think that's something about this movement that has been really inspiring, is seeing people across the nation work in a coordinated way. And the young man who has the bandana around his head, who's sitting in a chair, his name is Jesse. And at the end of the 40 days, we all went to Washington, D.C. for a march. And some of us did a direct action in Washington, D.C. And Jesse and I got to walk arm in arm to the Capitol in D.C. and were arrested alongside each other. And it was just this amazing thing to be connected with people across the country doing this work. So I just wanted to tell you that sad story because it really had an impact on me.
So Megan, that means the Poor People's Campaign is not just in Kentucky and Indiana.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so this work is happening simultaneously throughout the country, and that's really the power of the movement, is that it's happening in other states as well. And just like we just shared specific statistics and data around Kentucky and stories around Kentucky, each state is doing their own work in that same way. So back to our fundamental principles. Sorry, I got sidetracked there.
Good.
We are committed. This is the end of the 40 days when we were all in DC together. We are committed to lifting up and deepening the leadership of those most affected by systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, and ecological devastation, and building unity across lines of division.
We believe in the dismantling of unjust criminalization systems that exploit poor communities and communities of color, and the transformation of the war economy into a peace economy that values all humanity.
We believe that equal protection under the law is non-negotiable.
We believe that people should not live in or die from poverty in the richest nation ever to exist. Blaming the poor and claiming that the United States does not have an abundance of resources to overcome poverty are false narratives used to perpetuate economic exploitation, exclusion, and deep inequality.
The image on this is from last year, so this isn't an actual save the date, just so everybody knows. We did the We Will Do More tour last fall, so just ignore those dates on this graphic. We recognize the centrality of systemic racism in maintaining economic oppression must be named, detailed, and exposed empirically, morally, and spiritually. Poverty and economic inequality cannot be understood apart from a society built on white supremacy.
Whereas the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism blames poor and oppressed people for our poverty and oppression, our deepest religious and constitutional values insist that the primary moral issues of our day must be how our society treats the poor, those on the margin, women, LGBTQIA2+ folks, workers, immigrants, the disabled, the sick, and the sick. Equal protection under the law and the desire for peace, love, and harmony within and among nations.
We will build up the power of people and state-based movements to serve as a vehicle for a powerful moral movement in the country and to transform the political, economic, and moral structures of our society. There are two DOC pastors in this picture, and this is from the We Will Do More tour.
We recognize the need to organize at the state and local level. Many of the most regressive policies are being passed at the state level, and these policies will have long and lasting effect, past even executive orders. The movement is not from above, but below. Let me say that again. The movement is not from above, but from below.
We will do our work in a nonpartisan way. No elected officials or candidates get the stage or serve on the stage organizing committee of a campaign. This is not about left and right, Democrat or Republican, but about right and wrong. And I'd like to say something about this one, if I can expand on it a little bit more. Something that I've learned through the movement a lot of times we're asked to show up at different events. At our Poor People's Campaign events, we don't give candidates or elected officials the mic. And the reason for that is because we are rooted in leadership of impacted people. And so there's power in that. But what I've noticed as a pastor, and I think this is really important for faith communities to understand, is when it comes to activism, when it comes to showing up, when a pastor speaks, the crowd listens in a different way because a pastor really doesn't have a whole lot to gain by being in front of a crowd at an activist type event. Whereas so often you're hearing from elected officials who might want your vote, or community leaders that have some reason for being there. Whereas the faith community, I guess what I'm trying to say is the faith community has a responsibility to show up for this, because the faith community can move the needle on these social justice issues in a way that other organizations cannot, in a way that even our elected officials sometimes cannot. And so I think it has been sometimes there's been a stigma in the church around how we speak around social justice issues. Anytime we say anything that could be perceived as political, we're supposed to just be quiet and not say anything. But there's a difference between being political and being partisan. And the Poor People's Campaign has been deeply committed to not being partisan, but speaking up around social justice issues. And so I just wanted to say a note about this, because you all are church people, and it can be sometimes a fine line to figure out where we speak and where we're silent. And I think this nonpartisan fundamental principle is central for why and how the church can be involved in this movement. Oh, you're on mute.
I want to echo what Pastor Megan has said. Whenever you have two or more people, there's politics involved. And so we're not partisan, which means we're not as we say here in our principle, is not just something we say, it's something that we adhere to and that we believe in, that we're not Republican or Democrat, we're not left or right, we're not conservative or progressive or liberal. What we are is that we care about people. We care about God's justice. And so we don't endorse candidates. We do endorse principles, and we do endorse legislation. But we're not partisan. And as Pastor Megan said, we have to learn when to speak, and that it's us as the faith community that has a big role in helping to shape what's done and what's said. And so that's why you'll see at our campaigns, as Pastor Megan said, there's no one, politicians aren't allowed to have the mic, because we're not endorsing a candidate. We endorse a principle. Now, the candidate might have the principle, fine, but we're not partisan. But we might be political, but not partisan.
And if you see candidates, like we had a town hall last night, for instance, we invite candidates to come and listen, or we invite our elected officials to come and listen, because we think it's so important that those who are in office are hearing the needs of people who are impacted by these systemic issues.
We uphold the need to do a season of sustained moral direct action as a way to break through the tweets and shift the moral narrative. We are demonstrating the power of people coming together across issues and geography and putting our bodies on the line to the issues that are affecting us all.
The campaign and all its participants and endorsers embrace nonviolence. Violent tactics or actions will not be tolerated.
Megan, can you give them kind of that example of Pastor Barbara's comments when we were not allowed in to the State House? Remember how he told us to treat the persons who were just doing their jobs.
Yeah, that was a powerful moment, and probably some of the people who are on this Zoom workshop may have been there for that moment. I was so proud of the way Kentuckians and disciples specifically showed up that week. We were sort of in a high pressure moment in the campaign. We were in our 40 days of nonviolent direct action, and we had spent the night in the Capitol a couple weeks before, and so they had barred our entrance into the Capitol building, which we ended up winning a lawsuit that was unconstitutional. But at the moment, that hadn't gone through yet, and Reverend Barber had come down to be a part of our direct action that day. And so we linked arms and went in 2 by 2 to attempt to try to go into our Capitol building. And so there was this really tense moment, and some of you may have seen the pictures. It was really stunning to see, the police officers and Reverend Barber in that barred entrance. And we were chanting, "Let us in," and trying to get through. But Reverend Barber would say things like, we are here for these police officers as well. Do they have good health insurance? Are they getting paid a living wage? Part of nonviolence is it's more than the absence of violence, but it's sort of a belief in how we treat one another, how we speak to one another. He also was really intentional, that we were not, we were literally nose to nose with these police officers. And he was very intentional that we were not going to push our way in any form or fashion, but to let that moment be what it was. And I think that was the power of the moment, was that we didn't lay a finger on anyone as to be misconstrued as being violent, but instead we magnified the moment of Kentuckians being shut out of their own capital. So I don't know if that answers what you were looking for, Pastor Don, but that was definitely a powerful moment in the movement. And certainly in this moment, I'll just go back to my soapbox about the role of the church. This is why I think the church needs to be a part of these social movements, is because there's power in nonviolence, and we need folks who are organized and strategic and committed to the principles of nonviolence that can really push the needle on these issues to create change. And so I think it's very important.
I think it was important to just talk about that instance, because I think it's easy to think nonviolence. I think it's easy because most of us are not violent people. But when the pressure keg starts to hit that high pitch, when you're stressed, when you know you should have the right and someone is blocking you from doing what you ought to do, to maintain and to keep the principles of nonviolence. And that was the power of that moment, that we did not push our way through, but that we stayed with the principles of nonviolence. And during these times of pandemic, of COVID and racism that we're seeing displayed throughout the country, that we're seeing displayed even in our own state, in cities like Louisville and Lexington and Bowling Green and Paducah and other places around the Commonwealth, that we have to continue to maintain the nonviolence, because there's power in a nonviolent movement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're nearing the end of our time. We didn't even get through all the material that we have, but we don't want to over inundate you with information. So this website, poorpeoplescampaign.org, and then going to the About section, can talk in a little bit more detail about the Poor People's Campaign's demand, the audit, and the Jubilee budget. And so just like Dr. King's movement, there are actual demands for change, and not just making noise, but really acknowledging that there is a way to achieve things like a living wage, to achieve fewer people living in poverty and dismantling of systemic racism. There's a path forward for those things. It's not impossible. And so we would encourage you to go to the website, familiarize yourself with some of that information so that you can learn more about the campaign. And specifically, if you haven't already signed up, we would love for you to share your information. We won't email you all the time, but when something is coming up, like the town hall that happened this week, which won't be this week when you're hearing this Zoom call, but that happened when we were recording it the day before, you'll be able to know what's going on in Kentucky. So, Pastor Don, do you have any other closing words before we open it up for Q&A?
I just would invite them to go to this website to see the demands, the audit, and the Jubilee budget, and to understand these aren't pie in the sky. These are well-researched, looked at possibilities that can occur. If we care about those who are marginalized and those who are in poverty, if we really truly care about them, then these things can be accomplished if we come together and continue to let our voices be heard. But I just want to thank everyone for being in the workshop, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Great. Okay, well, we'll continue this conversation live in Kentucky, and we had an event where we dropped toothbrushes off at the governor's office. It was actually a really fun direct action. We had people bring toothbrushes, and we walked to the governor's office, and we just kept handing him toothbrushes. And the poor secretary, she just was like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all this? But we sort of tried to make it a visual, an important message for everybody to hear that, you know, it mattered that our kids who are poor and low income have dental care. And I think there were a lot of reasons that changed that summer, but it felt like we were a part of it. And that was really good. And then another thing that happened, Pastor Don's here now, so Pastor Don, we were just asked about the successes of Kentucky Poor People's Campaign. Another thing that I always think of is when we were in the Capitol one time, there was a young man who was in college who is gay, and he was doing like hours and hours of a sit-in with us. And he said to me, like, thank you as a pastor for being here and accepting me for who I am, because like I grew up in a tradition where I wasn't accepted. And that young man is at Louisville Seminary now. He's not a disciple, but I just was like, it gives me chills just thinking about it, because I think it matters for the church to show up in those spaces, because you never know who's watching. You never know who needs to see us in that light, because a lot of people think the church only means one thing. So I know that's maybe not we hope we had something to do with, again, not trying to be partisan, but our last governor, you know, was taking healthcare and was, you know, threatening teachers' pensions. And again, that's not intended to be partisan, but, you know, it was impacting poor Kentuckians' lives in a really big way. And we hope that our 40 days had something to do with, you know, it was a lot of people. We can't take full credit for, you know, the governor changing, but we hope we had some part in that, some small part in that. Amanda?
And I mean, what I like to say is that, I mean, we went to the governor. Regular people or people that have no voice, they got to speak to the governor. And I mean, at one point, told him to sit down. Governor, you know, he was going to stand up at his podium and, you know, and preach at us. And no, that's not how we do it. You sit down and you're going to listen to us. You're going to listen to our voices. And so that was very, very powerful. You know, sometimes that's just what you need. I just got to say it, you know, and it definitely gives me a way of expressing myself and gives me a way to to be involved, and just have a voice.
I would, this is Don, I would just add the level of participation by the common everyday person being able to have a voice so that as Amanda said, when we spoke with the governor, or when we spoke with officials, it wasn't people, pastors, or just folk who are out there pushing social justice issues, but it was everyday persons who are affected by the laws and the systems that have been created by the laws.
Yeah, there was a little echoing there, but I think Pastor Don was just repeating what Amanda, emphasizing what Amanda was saying. I think it's so powerful to give impacted people the mic. So often in the church, we say with very well-intentioned hearts, we want to be a voice for the voiceless, but it just turns out that most people have a voice. And if you simply pass the mic, they have stories to tell and want to tell them. And so I do think that was a big part of the power of the movement, or is a big part of the power of the movement. Do y'all have other questions?
I would just add a comment on that. First of all, I'm so impressed with that mindset to giving the literal, not trying to represent somebody else's voice, but turning over the mic, as you just said, Megan. And I do wonder, as people of churches across Kentucky, we have these assets, we have these buildings and platforms and places to do that, and that's what I think, taking the lead of what the model that you all have set up. And if there is an opportunity for us in the congregations to actually, give a platform for poor people, or people who traditionally have not had a voice, to come and speak to our congregations. I mean, I go to two different disciples congregations in Madisonville, and I don't think there's any shortage of people that have, a desire to listen, to learn, to help. But there is such a divide, even in a town as small as ours, in terms of the people, the people that I go to church with, and the people that largely we're talking about. And so to literally give them a voice, I just think there's a neat opportunity for us as churches to do that.
Yeah, and I think so often there's a gap there. Our church is going through something that's called City Shapers, and we're joining with a bunch of other community organizations to sort of ask if our programs to assist people are actually transforming people's lives and moving them out of poverty, or if it's just sort of just perpetuating, how is it moving the needle is sort of the question it's asking. And in our first phase of assessment, we realized that so much of our outreach is very transactional. And I think what you're talking about, giving people the chance to come talk to us, to be in relationship, is really important. And I mean, the other thing is folks are in our congregations too, right? Nothing will transform your congregation faster than if you have people living this in your very pews, and give those folks the mic. We don't have to assume that it's out somewhere else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did someone else have a question? I thought I saw a hand. Julie, Miss Toner.
Hi. I would say that if you've never done prison ministry, to give it a try. I've been doing it for a decade and I love it. And we do both worship and we also do life skills. And one of the best life skills classes we ever had was when we did public speaking. And it was amazing. All of the men would say afterwards, no one ever listened to me before. And I didn't know how to talk in front of a group before. And some of the things that we take for granted because of our privilege, we can pass those gifts and those experiences on to others so that they really do have a voice.
Yeah, one thing that is a real pain in the neck that we do with Poor People's Campaign is we try to keep people to a limited time frame, and we also ask them to turn in a script first, which can be really hard. But it's also really good because when you have people coming to events, nothing derails it quicker than somebody ending up speaking for 30 minutes instead of 3 minutes. So that has actually given us the opportunity to work with folks in that way, I think. But yeah, that's a great story. Anyone else?
Can you talk about training for direct action and nonviolence training, and because that's not something that we can do without knowing how to do it, I think.
Absolutely. I think in Bowling Green, we have worked with some of our organizers because try not to get too much of a soapbox here, but it's really important if you're organizing to be organized. And sometimes we take that for granted. I call it the basement work. So often we see the pictures of the public work, the prophetic work, the newspaper, front page of the newspaper work, and that's the exciting part. But the really important part, I think, is the basement work and even the worship work that prepares our hearts and minds and bodies for these direct actions. So for Poor People's Campaign, when we were doing nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience, you had to go through, first there was like a day-long training that just sort of trained us on the core principles. We actually did things like I can't remember what it was called, but you lined up and you would take turns with somebody maybe you've never even met, like hurling insults at them, but basically practicing being nonviolent, not just with your, not hitting somebody or something, but even with your words, just practicing being nonviolent. And just knowing, like we had trained lawyers that worked with us, and just sort of knowing the direct actions we were doing, the implications behind them, the charges that could be brought against us for them, that kind of thing. So we are trying, locally, we were trying to work with some of our organizers here because, following the death of George Floyd, there's all these protests and marches and things. And I don't know, I just think Poor People's Campaign has done a really good job of these trainings. And so we could always do something. I know, Rachel, we've talked about, potentially doing something for disciples on nonviolent direct action, because it really is a powerful experience to go through those trainings. Sorry, Pastor Don, I'm talking way too much. Do you want to?
No, you're doing well. You're doing well. I just was echo. If you can hear me, I don't even think you had to echo. That being involved in a nonviolent movement more than just saying, well, I can be peaceful. It's about going through the training to understand that folk will try to push your buttons. Folk will try to get you to engage in ways that will lead you to be other than nonviolent. And so it is a very necessary component that you are trained in these endeavors before you actually go out and do something. I think it's a very important thing, and I think it's something that we as disciples should look to do as we continue moving the movement forward.
Megan and Don, I have a question that may be longer than you want to answer. Have you had any success in the Poor People's Campaign of partnering with other movements? Local Black Lives Matter movements and things like that. What we find, at least in this part of my context in our county here, is that we have all these small organizations that keep trying to reinvent the wheel. And they're all striving for similar things, but we're having a hard time kind of bringing all of those people under one umbrella. And I'm just wondering if there's any resources or model or any of those kind of things in the Poor People's Campaign movement that helps to sort of make that happen better.
So
one important distinction is that Poor People's Campaign is a movement and not an organization. And so I think that really empowers us to bring different organizations together. So for instance, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ has been hugely important in Kentucky. I love looking back at like one of our biggest events in 2018. It was full of disciples. You know, my church drove our van there and back every single week for 6 weeks. That kind of goes back to the idea of like buildings as assets, what Eric was saying. Churches have all kinds of assets that they can offer to the movement that can really help move it forward. So we've had like Moms Demand Action have been a big part of our organizing. KFTC has been a big part of it and really supported our work. But again, I think it's an important distinction, and even National has helped guide us in that. Like I remember when we were first getting started, I was like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, like trying to organize. And they're like, we're not trying to build an organization. We're trying to build a movement, and there's a difference. And that sort of lets us stay in our own lane, if that makes sense. Like we're not competing with other organizations. We're trying to, we call it like a moral fusion movement. And so the whole point of it is to bring these different groups together, which is pretty disciple if you think about it, actually. Well, it looks like folks are heading out, but thank you guys for coming tonight. I was very pleased. A lot of folks came out, so thanks for learning a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign, and thank you to all of you who've been a part of it.